What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Nightmares Podcast, where we talk about all things horror, and we exclusively talk to awesome people in the horror community. We will talk about film, music, movies, artwork, and in this case, talking to an awesome screenwriter. Without further ado, we have Michael. If you would be so awesome to introduce yourself to the awesome community and let them know what you're all about.
Hi, fellas. It's great to be here. I appreciate you guys having me on. It's always great to get out and talk to horror community and loving horror people, like-minded individuals, as we all are. My name's Michael Donovan Horn. I'm a screenwriter. The past 3 years or so, I've had two major releases produced. The first was The Dinner Party in 2020, and then after that was Demigod in 2021. And they both did very well. They turned out really well, considering, we did a very moderate budget for both of them. And I was very pleased with how they turned out, and it was such a thrill to see your work come alive on the screen for the first time and the second time. So, I was raised in horror. My older sister had every Stephen King novel ever written, and introduced me to The Lost Boys, which is one of the first horror movies I ever saw, and I absolutely adored it. And I just kind of grew from there, and still to this day, my film collection is too big. I have nowhere to put any more movies I buy, like literally nowhere. And I read, of course, constantly, being a writer. You name it, I've read it. And my favorite thing to do is, of course, to go to Goodwill and find a book for $1 that I haven't read yet and sit it down. And I have a stack about 3 feet high. I'm just trying to get to read. What I'm reading right now currently is Clive Barker's Dark Worlds. Nice. Which they just released, and it's such a joy to read because I admire people like Stephen King and M.R. James and then like all the old school writers and Lovecraft, but the school I adhere to the most is Clive Barker. I'm just head over heels. When I first found the book's Blood back in the day, and I could not believe that story after story, like there's nothing terrible in there. I'm like each story was just as good or better than the last one. And I'm like, where the hell did this guy come up with this? Talk about an imagination. I had never read anything so gorgeously horrific in my life, because it's full of splatter and viscera, but it's also so hauntingly poetic at the same time. And I was like, that is the kind of school that I adhere to, that I just love. I have like everything Clive Barker's ever written and read them all. And when I found The Hellbound Heart, Hellraiser is my favorite horror movie of all time, because it is the most. Yeah, I see the poster.
Yep, yeah. It's right behind Zach.
I saw when you guys came on, I'm like, hey. Yeah. So, because it was the most imaginative thing I've ever seen, and still one of the most imaginative things I've ever seen to this day. Absolutely. And it was unlike anything I'd ever seen up until that point. And it's just, Doug Bradley in the role of Pinhead is just amazing.
So you kind of answered my universal question just a little bit, but I want to dive deeper into it, which is a question that I kind of ask everybody, which was, when did horror come into your life? But it sounds like your sister was a really big influence on you, when it came to horror. Where did her journey start, and then how did it kind of intersect with you, and then how did it progress as time went on?
My older sister is just very different in the best way possible, and she always tries to strike out and find new things and more interesting, she just goes against the crowd like you wouldn't believe. And I remember, we were sitting down and we were watching The Lost Boys, and she's like, "You should be lucky, you little punk." I'm like, "Why?" She's like, "Mom and Dad made me wait till I was 16 to watch this, and you're only 13. I was like, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Ooh, so this is going to be interesting."
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then, she had literally every Stephen King book like on her shelf, and I would just go grab one and start reading it, and, then exchange it for a different one. And then of course I started seeking out, other kinds of horror movies and stuff like that, which just it's just opened up the world to me is what she did, in the best way. And I call her a horror professor because any, you could ask her anything about everything. she's a guru, and I'm almost to her level, but not quite.
One of these days you'll be able to pull some Star Wars lines on her and everything else. When I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master.
Yeah. No, I could never best her on Star Wars either.
No, you're talking to two pretty Star Wars fanatics too. By the way, the nerd culture runs deep throughout this entire thing. So so after you got introduced to Lost Boys, the was that like the pivotal movie for you, or did it become even more influential as time goes on? Because some people are like, that was the movie that I'm like, yeah, this is where I'm going to be a fan for forever, or did it get more deeper as you went into more hardcore horror, like the Jasons and the Freddys of the world?
The Lost Boys was the gateway drug because, number one, it had such great, gore and terror, but it was also freaking hilarious. And I remember thinking, horror movies can be funny? Like, how am I supposed to feel about this? Like, they're eating people and blood everywhere, but then, like, when you wait till mom finds out, like, I was like, what is this? It was like this stew. And then I was like, okay, well, then I got to look at these other ones. And then, of course, I started watching more and more. And, of course, some of them weren't, funny. They're straight up terror. But at the same time, I was like, okay, well, this is another school all in itself, too. And it's also very interesting. And the thing that really pulled me into horror was just the fact that it was so different from everything else. School dramas and comedies. I love comedy and stuff like that, but just the darker aspects of life and the things they can play with on screen and the stories, which just drew me in because the darker side of life is always something that's really been attuned to me. Even my wife, my loving wife, we're talking about a woman who falls asleep listening to true crime podcasts. So
my fiance does the same thing, and by the way, there's a story that you'll enjoy for just 30 seconds. I was in a play over the weekend, and one of my dear friends, who's also my roommate, came with his fiance to go see the show, and they're like, "Hey, you want to go get something to eat afterwards?" I'm like, "Yeah." Like, and then there's a good Philly cheesesteak next door because we're in Chicago. And, ironically enough, a Philly cheesesteak in Chicago, but apparently it's the only place that has it in Chicago. So we went next door, and I've been trying to get out of the habit of having my phone on me all the time and looking at it. I really want to be engaged with the person that's in front of me. So I had it in my pocket, and I had forgotten to message her that I was going out and everything else. And I look at my phone, it's just all these missed calls and all these mixed text messages. And guess what she was doing? She was watching true crime, and it was a story about how that was the last time I saw my fiance. And and then he was never spoken from again after calling him like 20 times. I'm like, sweetheart, you need to stop watching those. You need to stop watching those. And she's like, I know, but I like them so much, and but I got a little carried away, and I thought you were in a trunk somewhere.
You want a funny story? My wife and I were watching the last season of the new Unsolved Mysteries on Netflix that they put out.
Sure.
And they did a really good job with it. And I remember watching one of the first episodes, and it was really, really intense and everything. And then, of course, the show comes to an end, and they talk about what's going on normally. And my wife literally says out loud, "What? They didn't solve it?" And I, of course, wait a beat. And I'm like, "Honey, what's the name of the show?" And she's just like, "Shut up."
In fairness, we all have those moments. We all.
Yeah.
Mark has them more than others.
Oh, all the time. Oh my God, he heard me ramble to my fucking wedding coordinator the other day. They just ramble about shit. And he's like, was any of that coherent? I'm like, nah, probably not. But that's what I pay her for. I pay her to make sense. So that's how life works. So that's really cool though that you discovered everything. And it's interesting you brought up like family dynamics and everything else. Like, as you became more and more of a fan, like what was your parents' reaction? Were they like fans of classical horror, or were they just not in that world at all?
My parents are extremely they are huge comedy fans.
Okay.
Old school. I mean, and it's interesting because around my dad, I grew up on like Bob Hope, Danny Kaye, all the big comedies. I mean, Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis, and I have a ton of all of the movies on like Blu-ray, trying to keep them. But also it was interesting because even doing that, like one of the first Bob Hope movies I watched with my dad was Ghostbreakers, which is about Bob, like going into like a haunted manor and trying to rescue a girl from supposed ghosts, and there's a zombie in it and all kinds of stuff. And once again, it's hilarious, but it delved really kind of almost deeply into the horror aspect. It had a lot of elements of that. And so once again, that was like, this is funny, but I'm like, I also like the spooky stuff going on here, and so that, along with, when I watched Lost Boys with my sister and whatnot, and just kind of the all of those things stewed together, and it developed what people ask me why I like horror movies so much, and I give them a term I invented when I tell them about it. I say that for me, horror has what I like to call a ghoulish hilarity, meaning like think about Friday the 13th. Jason, he's running around killing campers wearing a hockey mask with a machete. I mean, when you're in the movie, but when you think about it, it's freaking hilarious.
And by the way, massive Friday the 13th fan. Massive.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. They're great, but when you look at him, you're like, this is hysterical. Like he picks up a kid in a sleeping bag and bashes them against a tree. Like, how are you not going to laugh at that?
Which is brilliantly made fun of in Jason X. The hologram was just fucking great.
God, I love those movies.
I mean, of course, like you just sometimes you have to laugh at the absurdity of the situation, but also too is like it's a release. The same way you laugh on a roller coaster or laugh through a haunted house, like it's frightening, but it's also it's humorous, and you laugh at your friends who are like you got and it's a whole experience that comes with it, and it's cathartic.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. I mean, Freddy Krueger with fish knives on his hand, wearing a Christmas sweater and a fedora. I mean, come on, it's amazing. Also. You just love it. I mean, how can you not love it? And then like I said, when I saw Hellraiser finally, back when I was like, I don't know, like 14, 15, I was like, okay, this is scary, but there was no humor in it. And it not only was it dark and twisty, but it was also very like romantic and poetic. And Pinhead didn't crack jokes. He was a very like punishing like teacher.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what horror can be too. Okay, I'm all in it with this.
Yeah,
and so I kind of graduated, if you will, from all these different kind of levels until I found the niche that I love the most and what really really excites me when I go see horror movies or seek them out to this day.
Absolutely. And I think you'll appreciate this. I always, when I describe horror to people, I say there's only two different types of horror movies and or a combination of the two, which is one, there's the fun, balls to the wall, people are going to die, it's going to be a great time. It's the Freddy versus Jasons of the world. Those are fucking fantastic. They're great. They're a lot of fun. It's a whole big experience. And then there are the horror movies that have something to say, that actually have something poetic to say. And then there's combinations of the both. I mean, one of my favorite horror movies of all time is Reanimator, and that's a combination of both. I think that has a lot to say, but it's H.P. Lovecraft. Like H.P. Lovecraft always has something interesting to say. So you're always going to run into those type of combinations, And I happen to love the story one a little bit more, and I think Zach's a little bit more of the camp of I just want to watch some fun shit happen and people to fucking die. That's the reason why he's the Friday the 13th fan the way he is, and that's all that is. It's a place to turn your brain off, especially considering some of the. What was the one that you said? Was it Jason Goes to Manhattan? or a couple different ones. You're like, just don't think about it too hard.
No, you cannot think of a coherent story with Jason because there's so many continuity errors between the movies. It's unfucking.
Yeah.
I like to say that Friday the 13th takes place like 10 or 20 years in the 80s. And then, like, you finally get to, Jason Goes to Hell, and we finally hit the 90s. Jason X just goes way into the fucking future. And then Freddy vs. Jason is just 2000s. It's just like, okay.
Yeah,
but for the most part, you get 20 years of the 80s throughout the rest of the movies. And you just have one hell of a time throughout that entire series. And I fucking love it.
Oh, yeah, of course. Like Halloween 3... Season
God.
of the Witch.
Hold on. I stand by this theory. If Halloween 3 was Halloween 2, we would think it was fucking genius.
Well, yeah, but here's it was amazing because what they were going to do is, of course, they were going to just leave Michael and keep making movies based on Halloween with all kinds of storylines. And you're like, yeah, that would have been cool. But, the third one was, they did what they did, And I feel like maybe if it would have been a little more, it's great the way it is, but if people would have gotten into it a little bit more, then we could have seen, who knows what we could have seen after that.
It would have been very different. Been very different. And also, too, Friday the 13th was supposed to follow a similar trajectory. It was supposed to be anthology of different things, but I guess people fell in love with Jason. So people like Zach fell in love with Jason. So it just made sense.
Yeah.
And also too is it's great to introduce a lot of people to a lot of different horror movies that my two favorite of all time though are Scream and Cabin in the Woods. So I exist on the meta side. So I really dig those, especially Cabin in the Woods. Cabin in the Woods I think exceeds it for me, even ahead of Scream. I just love that movie.
Oh, that I actually wrote. I write horror articles for Collider.
Okay.
And the last one I wrote was how Cabin in the Woods subverted the horror genre. And so I dived into that. Me and my wife saw that in the theaters and we just died. It was fantastic.
I have a question. And I asked this to every Cabin in the Woods fan, and Zach's sick of hearing it, but I don't care. Who in their right mind would make a button that does that? And by the way, there's not even a little locky thing on there. There's not even a plastic lock with a key. It's just chilling there. Like who would just leave that button unattended?
Well, you gotta have that button in that movie. I mean, how could you not have that button in that movie? Come on.
You have to have that.
Come on, you're sitting in the theater watching this movie, and the second you see all of those things in those cubes, you're just dying. Like, come on, let them all out. We want to see them all get out at once.
Oh, man, you just turn into an anarchist. Like, I turn into an anarchist. I'm like, bring down the system. And I just remember, like, I never felt that, like, if I had to pick a horror movie moment that's one of the best calm before the storms moment, is when all the guards stop firing,
shit.
And then literally you just hear the elevator shifting, and you go, "What's about to happen? It's gonna get great."
Okay.
And then the guy's like, "Oh fuck!" And then the elevator doors open and chaos comes out. It's so good. I've watched that movie several times with him, and it's so good every time.
Well, the best part about the whole big treat about that movie is that these are what these guys have been doing for how long to keep these gods sated. So you're like, how can you not imagine those two down in the bunker orchestrating Friday the 13th, Hellraiser, like all the good, like
Merman.
Like, how can you not picture them down there going through all of that? I mean, that's the biggest treat that movie does for you. Is you just like, when you go back and watch those, you're like, just picturing them down in the bunker, hitting the buttons and stuff, and you're like, that's fantastic.
Oh yeah, and then also the board with all the with all the different one. The one I remember is witches and sexy witches. Often to remember that those are two different things.
Look, I should get prizes. I had zombies. Yeah, you did, but this is redneck torture family zombies. It's totally different.
It's a totally different speed. I'm never gonna see a fucking merman in my lifetime. It's terrible. And then and then obviously Scream was very influential on me, and then I it was definitely seeing some of those meta things, so it was I always dig the meta, and actually too one of my favorite horror comedies is Tucker and Dale versus Evil.
Oh, yeah, of course.
The still one of my absolute favorites. And I think most people that are like, I love horror comedy, I'm like, that's something you have to see, like if you haven't already seen it.
That is so well written, it isn't even funny.
Oh, dude, yeah, absolutely. Please go ahead.
I still haven't seen. There's an option on the Blu-ray where you can watch the movie from the teen's point of view.
Yes, I've heard about this. I've never got a chance to actually find it. I haven't got a
chance either, and I'm dying to like see it. Where like they just the Tucker and Dale are complete madmen, and I'm like, that's got to be hysterical.
It's got to be amazing. Zach's already thinking about it right now, especially him with the chainsaw and everything else with the bees. Oh my god, gotta love. I mean, Zach and I grew up with Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps, so we're the '90s kids. So we got to do that. But you grew up in the MTV generation, so I mean, Lost Boys is vampire horror and MTV, and put it in a blender and hit frappe, and that's what you get. Yeah. So I mean, which is pretty cool. So I'm curious too, and now it's an opportunity for us to talk about your art form when it comes to screenwriting. How did that start to enter your life?
Well, I mean, I've grown up with horror movies. One day you get, and I remember starting to write things in junior high and high school and getting in because I got into the theater programs. And then when I got to the point in high school where I was actually allowed to write my own plays to put on, because every fall we had a night of one acts where the students would cast and direct them and put them on for an audience. And then it occurred to me, I actually asked my theater teacher, Mr. Lamson, who was fantastic. I was like, could I actually write my own play? And he's like, yeah. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, as long as it's, appropriate and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, sweet. And so I did that. And then, me and my friend Lauren Hickman, who was a fellow student of mine, directed it, and it went over really well. And then my friend Spencer Griffin, who I went to high school with, who actually worked and did a lot of work for Funny or Die.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, he's getting big into the media content world, and he and I sat down and we're like, what if we did our own spring night of one acts that's never been done before, and like you and I will write all the plays and cast and everything. And that's what we did, and they let us do it. And we did 5 plays, and we wrote each one of them, and they all ranged from comedy to thrillers and whatnot. And it was a huge success. And all the money that came in, we put it to a local charity, and it was mind blowing. And after that, I was addicted. I mean, like writing something and seeing it come alive, and just the whole creating worlds, creating characters is just such a huge drug that you can't let go of. And then, of course, in college, I got into college and I got accepted. I got a theater scholarship in college, and it was just performing up the wazoo and writing things. And my theater professor, Richard Poole, is an amazing man. And he actually sat down with me one day and he's like, there is no program here, but if you'd like, you and I could do an independent program about writing and playwriting. I was like, yes, please. And so, we recommended a couple books for me to buy, and I would read them, and I would do the exercises, and he would grade them, and it really, really helped to refine my skills. And of course, carrying horror in the back of my mind here that whole time. And then once I graduated, and then I sat down one day, and I was like, I love horror movies. Maybe I should write one. And which I'd never tried before, because all I'd been doing was plays and theater and whatnot. And I was like, okay. So I started, and I remember vividly, after I got out of college, I was still living at home, and I was working in the photo department at Walgreens, and I would literally spiel out like inches of receipt paper, and then I would write down whatever was in my head and pocket them. And then at the end of like 3 months, I had a pile like this, just receipts with ideas on it, and I was like, okay, it's time to write. And I sat down at the computer at my mom and dad's and just started churning shit out. And the first thing I ever wrote was a horror movie called, I called it 1 Million Monsters, which I don't think is the title that works nowadays, but it was very interesting because the theory or the premise was that serial killers in the U.S. are actually bred in labs by the government. And it started in the 60s because the people in America started to get a little too rambunctious, really against America, blah, 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 blah. And so scientists figured out how to do things to the brain to put these people out in the world to keep them in their houses and afraid of the news and things like this. And the story is about a girl named Samantha who falls asunder. It starts off like any other horror movie. She and some friends are going cross country to a wedding, and they get sidetracked, and they get butchered by a madman out in the woods and whatnot. But then halfway through, government agents show up with tear gas and put everybody out, whatever. And then Samantha suddenly wakes up in New York City, and she has a new hair color, a new name, a new life, and she doesn't remember her old one. And then all of a sudden, she has a compulsion to start butchering people. And she's like, what is going on with me? I don't remember this stuff. And things kind of start coming back into her brain. And at that point, she meets a man named Elijah, who was one of the very first test subjects of this experiment. And he freed himself from it. And he basically frees Sam from it. And then they both start their own mission of going around and killing all the other serial killers, trying to even things out. So basically it was this huge mesh of like Frankenstein, Alice in Wonderland, all these kind of nifty little things I put together. And then I finished it and I was like, is this even any good? I don't, I mean, I've read screenplays, I've seen movies, but this is the first time I've ever done anything. So I was like, well, the only way to find out, put in a competition. And so I entered Write Movies. It was their 13th annual screenwriting, and it was an international competition, and they only select 1,000 entries from all over the world. And second place.
Nice. Very nice.
Which you're like, yes! But then you're like, if only the winner hadn't entered this competition.
Yeah, that happened. If only.
But and I thought it was pretty good, but I was shocked. I was like, out of 1,000 international entries, I got second place.
And the funny thing is as you were talking, I was like, you almost developed like a creepypasta before a creepypasta. Like it has that like creepypasta edge, like where it's about like government conspiracies and related to horror, and like something that could be like an actual true story about it's kind of has that edge to it, which is very interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
But that blew me away, and I couldn't believe it. And then, of course, I started sending it out to literary agents and production companies, and then Big Screen Entertainment, which is a subsidiary of Paramount, actually picked it up and optioned it. But then, which was great, but then it kind of went into development hell, and as it is, which was disheartening. But just the fact that I apparently can write, according to these people, and also to a production company, and all these things, that I was just like, well, then I should keep doing it, because seeing these things come alive on screen would be amazing, and I would love to have this kind of career.
That's fantastic. So I mean, I imagine that too. I know you kind of mentioned it a little bit and kind of talked about it, but for those people who aren't the writers of the world and everything, what does it feel like to actually see something that you just made up in your head? I imagine I can probably relate it to a musician playing live and having the audience chant the words back to them. So I'm very curious on how you feel about like actually seeing somebody perform your dialogue.
It's amazingly surreal. Like the fact that what I'm seeing literally was in my brain. And now it's literally like a dream coming true. Something in your brain that is now in front of you, made real by all these dedicated, wonderful people, actors and set designers and whatnot, and the director and all these wonderful things. And it was absolutely mind blowing, especially because, and I've said this during filming to like the cast and stuff, is that when I write a line in my brain and put it down on paper, you envision it. a certain way. But then when you see an actor take that line and do something you didn't even realize they could do with it and make it so much better than it was in your brain, it's just like that was me, but also you, and we're creating this thing together, which is unbelievably stellar. And like, yeah, it was unbelievably amazing.
Nice, nice. So let's get into the actual, some of these projects that are more known and everything else. And I believe, Dinner Party was one of the first big ones that was big for you. How did that idea come about, and how did you start to develop it, and how did it come about?
That's funny because back in college when I was writing plays and in the theater program, sometimes I would like steal my parents' video camera from home, and then I would get a bunch of theater kids or just my friends together and say, let's make something kooky. Like, let's find a house. Let's just improv lines and stuff like that. And that's what we did for the dinner party. We had people around. I'm like, we're going to do this, and I came up with this, crazy, rich people eating other people, which, is kind of metaphorical in its own right. And we literally filmed it at my friend's aunt's house during one night. We started at like 6 and we didn't get done till like 3 a.m. And we were wearing our own clothes and just kind of doing whatever and making it work. And then of course after we were done, they were all like, "I'm like, time for sleep," and they were like, "No, are you fucking kidding? Let's watch it." I was like, "Okay." So we put it in. We watched it, and then it was amazing experience. And then a few years later, because I found it a few years later, just the cassette that I recorded it off the camera, and was watching it. And I went to my friend Pat, who was my college roommate for years and one of my best friends now. And I was like, "Do you think I can make this into a real movie?" He's like, "Why not? I mean, like turn it into, like, just sit down and actually write a real script for it." I was like, "Okay." So I did. And it took me like, I think a couple months. And at the end of it, I remember I was like, this is not bad. And this is about, I remember writing this, I think it was about 5 months or so after I'd won second place. So I had this really newfound confidence. I was like, if I could do that, then I should be able to do this. Plus, I'm not really making it out of thin air. I mean, we kind of already made it. So why not? And so I did. But then I wrote it and I was like pretty good. And I was doing some edits. And then things moved along and I kind of forgot about it. And then my friend Jim Bullion, who's a producer friend of mine, who back when I met him was he found one of I wrote, well, okay. So so I won the thing and everything, and then I was writing a bunch of other stuff, and then I actually posted them online on simplyscripts.com, because you can post your unproduced stuff on there for people to read and comment on and whatnot. Yeah. And I basically wrote like an action comedy kind of deal, very, very Tarantino in vein. And Jim was randomly looking for projects to do, and he found it, he read it, he loved it, and he dropped me a line. He's like, "This is good. Do you have anything else?" I was like, "Sure." And then Jim and I we've been working together for, like 15 years now. And he's in Mississippi, he's big. He owns several restaurants, a lot of money and stuff like that. And he wanted to get into film producing, and he found me. And then he was trying to put something together about 2018, kind of a deal. And Miles Doliak, who directed The Dinner Party, who's been acting in Hollywood for years, he's very gifted. And he had not just started, but he had been directing and writing his own independent features for a while. And then Jim called me. He's like, "Do you have any nasty little horror things you've written or anything?" And I was like, "Oh, not recently, but I have this one, which I wrote a while ago." He's like, "Send it to me." I was like, "All right." And of course I sent it, and I'm like, "They're going to, now, blah, blah, blah." And then literally 2 days later, Jim calls me and says, "Okay, we're going to produce it." And I was like, "What? Hey, what? Huh? What?"
Okay.
Like, "Yeah, Miles is going to direct it. We're going to produce it with, and I was like, "Okay." And he's like, "Well, we're going to make a few changes to stuff here and there." And I'm like, "That's fine. It can always be better." and I did. We did some rewrites and whatnot, and then Miles contacted me and said he really liked the work, and we started casting, and then the thing just happened, and it was great, and I got to go to set for. My wife was pregnant at the time, so out of the 3-week shoot, I was only there for about a week and a half. But I mean, just being there on set and experiencing everything was fantastic, So that's how the dinner party came to be, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. The and I had a question, but I want to make sure Zach's our one of our resident screenwriters here on our side, so I want to make sure that we leave him an opportunity to ask anything that he might want to ask.
Oh, how many drafts did you have before the final script was ready and everything like that? So on average, how many drafts would you say that you went through?
The very first one is the first one I wrote way back when, and then Miles wanted to cast his wife Lindsay in a role that didn't exist, so we had to add a role, and then we did that, and that was the next draft. And then when I originally wrote it, I put a bunch of really dark comedy into it too to make it kind of fun, and he wanted that cut out, and he wanted it just to be like straight up horror terror. I was like, okay. So then we went through for the next draft and we eliminated all of that, and then we bunched up a bunch of the violence, put in more gore and stuff like that. So I would say, and then after that, Miles went over and added his touches for the third. So I'd say about 4.
Okay.
4 before we started, I think, is the ultimate number we had.
All right.
So it wasn't too bad. We just a lot of rearranging things and pumping some scenes up and whatnot, and also a lot of when I write, I love it, coming from my theater background. I love to have my characters talk. Just a dialogue is like music, when you write it down, and each character has their own rhythms and whatnot. And so sometimes when I write things, I tend to let dialogue go on for a little long, like theater background, monologues, soliloquies, stuff like that. And they had me cut a bunch of that down too, of course, to make it a little punchier. So, but yeah, it was about 4 drafts, and then we were good to go.
Okay, nice. Mark?
Nice, very nice. And I come from and I've been acting since I was 8, and I come from the theater background, so I understand the monologues and the lofty things and how you have to keep it moving. And with film, you can do a little bit more show than tell. So I'm curious though too, is we come from a different kind of process because Zach's the resident screenwriter, and most of the screenwriters that we have are part of our internal teams, so they're already executive producers on there, so they have to be in there in a multifunctioning role. But I'm very curious about what did they require for you on set with being the writer? How much involvement did you have with the actual production, or were you there just to provide context? How was your role on what was your role on set?
It was actually really cool because honestly, when I showed up, because we filmed it in this giant, mansion that belonged to a surgeon down there that we were basically renting for the production, and just walking up and seeing this house, and they have this huge fountain. I mean, it's in the film, this huge fountain out front and everything. And it was really great. And I was like, I remember thinking to myself, it's fun to be here because my job is done. I'm the reason all you people are here.
That's one way to put it. Yeah.
Done. I kind of, you guys like this enough to cast it and make this happen. And but it was interesting because during filming, Miles is a very gifted director, and he would, give suggestions and do his directing and whatnot. But he knew that it all came from my head, So if there was something here, and I would go up and I'd say, Miles is like, and Sawandi Wilson, who played Sebastian in the movie, did a wonderful job. Like he was. At one point, he was playing the piano. His character was sitting down playing the piano, and he was doing a good job of stuff like that. And Miles was like, that's cool. And I was like, well, it's like, Miles, can I just talk to Sawandi for a second? And he was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And so I went up and I sat down next to Sawandi on the bench in front of the piano. And I was like, so you're doing a really good job. And I was like, but do you realize why your character is doing this right now? And he was like, kind of. And I was like, okay. It was like, you're doing this because your character right now is fucking bored. And it's just great to see his face go, oh, all right. And I was like, yeah, like you've made your kill. Now you're just waiting for everybody else to do their thing so you can eat. And he's like, okay, that makes sense. It's like, yeah, so you're in here, like, I'm gonna play, this is what I do, biding time, and then you're like, blah 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 blah, I want to eat. Where is everybody? Yeah, and then it was great because then when he did the next take, everybody was like, oh, because it was so much more animated and it made a lot more sense for his character, and it came out, and it's just things like that happen. And then Camille McEwen, who played Agatha, she has a big scene where she ties poor Allie, who plays Haley, up and has sex with her dead husband in front of her. And before that, I remember she sitting, because she was wearing, her really, you know, underwear, for the scene and everything, and she had this big robe on, just sitting on the couch like this. And I was like, I went and sat to her. I was like, "How you doing? You okay? You fine?" And she's like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Hey, while you're here," and I was like, "Yeah," and she's like, this whole speech I've got here, like, well, can you tell me about that? And I was like, "Sure." It's like, what are you gonna do? And then she told me, we talked about it and stuff and everything, and she had a really good grip on it, but there were things that I talked about that she was like, "Okay, that's interesting. Yeah," it's like, I can do that. And then she would go up, and she would do the scene, and the first time she did it, it blew me away because it was like, it's just amazing when it comes like right out of your brain. You know what I mean? And so I got to do stuff like that here and there and talk. And Allie Hart, who played Haley, the lead in the dinner party, she's an amazing actress and a wonderful person. And I really got to bond with her on set and talk about her character and things and watch her, the way she works, and the way she played off everybody else and all the things going on. And so it was kind of nifty to kind of just be on set and be like, make suggestions. And Miles was great for letting me do that, because I mean, being the original script writer, knowing what I want it to be on screen, and then having him, collaborate with him on touches and things like that, just really was really, really, I really enjoyed it.
And I can speak for the actor's perspective. It's very cool to have, especially if you're like a nerd about your craft and everything else. It's a lot of fun to have, discussions, to have the scriptwriter readily available there. And hey, like, what were you thinking about this? And then like, just talk about it. Even if 90% of the stuff that you discuss is not going to be used. But for two things. One, it's that 10% that really makes the difference in certain circumstances, but also more importantly, it's just fun. It's fun to talk about shop, and it keeps things fresh and fun and inviting. So and that's really, really cool. So I always love to ask this because I think filmmaking it invites a lot of really fun and wild stories. Were there any fun mishaps or anything like that you witnessed when you were on the set of the film, or anything like kind of crazy that happened?
They our Julie, the head of our production design, and also did a lot of the special effects and the art, behind everything. She and a couple of her crew a went to I think it was a Home Depot or something, because they needed like some more wood or something for one of the scenes, like something was falling down or whatever, they had to repair it. And they were there, and they were walking into the place, and there was a man with his truck standing right there, and he was moving a box, and the box was meowing. And Julie and people are like, "Is there a cat in there?" He's like, "Yeah." And he literally tells them, he's like, my daughter doesn't want it anymore, so I think I'm just gonna go, drop it in the water. And they were like, "What?" They were like, "You're going to drown that cat?" He's like, "Well, I don't know what else to do with it, blah, blah, blah." And they were like, "We're taking it. Thank you." So they literally confiscated this kitten from this guy, and they brought it to set. And so my wife ended up spending most of her time, this adorable pregnant woman, holding this little kitty in between takes. And then we would, like, for fun, they would come pose him in shots and whatnot. And they had, the mansion had this huge bathroom, and that's where we kept the kitty and gave it. Someone went out and bought it food, and so she became like this unofficial mascot for the production.
That's awesome.
which was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I did want to give an opportunity real quick though to talk about the other film, the Demigod, and how that kind of came into being, came into fruition. How did that lead in from the other project?
Well, they, the dinner party did really well, and it got a lot of. I mean, it turned out really well and got a lot of really good reviews. And so Miles and Jim were like, "Well, we should do something else. I could get a decent budget and film something else, but we need, to kind of move on it or whatnot." And so Jim called me and he said, Miles and I were talking. We want to do something else. We want you to write it. And I'm like, sweet. And he was like, to cut down on costs and stuff, he's like, would it be fun if we kind of did something out in the woods? And I was like, yeah, because, the first one was, a house, urban area kind of thing. And so they wanted to do different. I was like, sweet. And then they were like, well, come up with something and we'll talk about it and whatnot. And I was like, cool. And that's my favorite part of the process. It's just, imagining things, coming up with characters and premises and whatnot. And so I sat down and then I vividly remember I couldn't think of shit. I could not think of shit.
There.
What has been done in the woods? What spooky shit has not been done in the woods? Witches? No. Maniacs? No. Inbred people? No. You go through everything and you're like, God damn it.
Cabin in the Woods fucked us.
Yeah, right? And I was just like, shit. But I love the idea of a dark primordial forest, things going on. So I was like, I got to make this work. And I was like running out of things, and God bless my wife. My wife is like, well, let's get it. And we were both on our phones, and she was like going through stuff. She's like, well, you can do this. Like, no. But I'm like, yeah. I was like, and she's like, well, could you mesh some of them together? And I'm like, honey, this is me. When I hear the idea, I'll know it when I hear it. It's just that spark that just goes, that's it. And she remembers going through. She's like, okay, forest, blah blah blah. And then she literally goes, well, what about the Great Hunter? And I was like, what is that? That is it. Tell me what that is. And she's like, well, it's a legend for Germany, blah blah blah. I was like, you mean Kurunos, like the forest god? She's like, yeah. And I was like, dude, that's it. And then, of course, it's like he leads a great hunt every year. He's reborn every midwinter and leads this great hunt. And I was like, well, what if he's hunting people, along with animals and stuff like that? I mean, that would be fucking creepy. And in the woods, and you've got folk horror and lore. And I'm a huge folk horror fan. And I was like, this is right up my alley. And then I just started to write it. And it took me about 3 weeks, I think. And I sent the first draft to Jim and Miles, and they were like, this is fantastic. And they were like all over it. And there's so much, they could do with it. And it was like a go, like, okay, we're going to produce it. And we're going to, we got an area to film down here in Mississippi. And we went to Little Black Creek, which is like a campground kind of thing. And the best part about the whole thing was that Jim got back to me because after he read the first draft, he's like, I got to tell you, Mike. He's like, when you sent me the dinner party and I read it, he's like, I was like, this is really good, but it didn't scare me. It was interesting, but I wasn't really creeped out or anything. It was just a lot of possibilities. Cool. But he's like, but then I read Demigod, and he was like, it chilled me to the fucking bone, man. And I was like, thanks, dude. He's like, no, seriously, this is going to be kick-ass. I was like, okay, cool. And I don't remember what I called it. I think I just called it The Hunt or something like that. And it was actually Jim who came up with the title Demigod. Mm. And and then they started casting everybody. But the thing about Demigod is we were filming during COVID. Mm. And that was a challenge in itself because we all had to get tests every morning like clockwork. And, if somebody were to show up positive, we would have been fucked. And then somebody showed up positive, and we were fucked because the original cast, the Sherry, who plays the pregnant woman at the beginning, was actually supposed to play the middle witch, the role of Latara. Mm. And the reason they switched it is because, and I was devastated by this. The character of Fell, the third witch, the feral witch, was supposed to be played by Allie Hart from the dinner party, which Allie has those eyes, it would have been mind blowing. I was because that was my one condition was like Miles wanted to cast Lindsay again. That was his condition. Jim's condition was that we hire somebody else to do the music for this film. And mine was, I want Allie in the role as Fel. And it worked. And she was hired and everything. And then on the way to set, Allie tested positive for COVID. And not only that, Sherry was the one who was driving her.
Mm.
So Sherry became exposed to Allie. And then all of a sudden, not anymore. And they had to literally recast. And Sarah, who ended up playing Fel, was like one of our PAs, who luckily, you know, she had an acting background, so they stepped in and they reorganized things, and then they made Sherry take over the role of the pregnant woman, a short one, so that she could film her stuff and get by, and then, you know, and then we filled the role of Latara, and it basically was, and that literally all happened within 2 hours. And I remember because I was walking to set one day, and Dan, our makeup artist, was like, yeah, well, they got to go over the stuff, all the big stuff that happened. I was like, big stuff that happened? What are you talking about? He's like, well, I shouldn't probably tell you, just go find Miles and talk to him. And then I talked to him, and then I was like, son of a bitch. Like, I could not believe. I was devastated because Allie had even been sending me rehearsal footage of her being Fel. Mm. And it was Sarah did a great job, but Sarah's Fel is about here. Allie would have been here. Sure. And I was so let down, and it was just so shitty. For everybody, we all had to deal with that, you know. And luckily, you know, people's talents. Elena, who did play Latara, did a great job. I mean, and it all came together at the end, but it was a nightmare for a while there.
Yeah, no, I know we filmed one of our episodes during a little bit more on the later side of COVID. I think the people were getting a little bit more comfortable, we had our own set of difficulties that were beyond COVID. So I'm glad that we didn't, you know, we were lucky enough that didn't get tossed in our mix because we had enough. We had enough stuff going on. We didn't need to have one more thing. So I am curious. One last question though too on all this stuff, and then we'll get to the. I do a fun question of the podcast at the end. When it came to post production, were you involved in any of that process, or were any of your opinions, or you were completely off limits and everything else?
It's one. I mean, they were doing it in Mississippi, and I live here.
Sure. Fair enough.
But they did. I didn't because it didn't occur to me to ask during the dinner party because I was just so in love with being there and watching them make it and everything. And then I sat back and was like, sweets in the can. I can't wait to see it. And post-production was just like out of my head. Like, you know, I didn't even think about that. But then, like, you know, Demigod happened. I was like, oh yeah, they're doing post stuff. And I was like, I wonder how this is going. And so, you know, they were in Mississippi doing it. So I couldn't get down there or anything, but I did call Miles and I was like, can you at least send me the first cut, you know, so I can watch it and stuff. He's like, yeah, no problem. So they did. And they sent me the first cut of it and everything. And I was like, are any changes going to be made to this or whatever? He's like, we're not really looking for any changes, but you know, you can tell me what you think and everything. And so I got to sit and watch the first cut of Demigod. And, you know, I mean, honestly, there was nothing I would have changed, you know, and if there was, I don't think I would be able to make it happen, you know, because they're all there and I couldn't get there, you know, kind of a thing. And plus it would cost, you know, more money to go up and do any kind of more shooting and whatnot. And we didn't have money for that.
No, absolutely.
But I remember watching the first cut and being very pleased, you know, especially I remember still feeling wounded watching it, knowing what it could have been, you know, but what was, you know, the finished product was something I still really enjoyed. I thought they did a really good job considering everything we're going on. And plus being able to watch Elena get lit on fire and run on fire and seeing the whole process of that was really interesting.
Yeah, Zach got to fulfill a lifetime goal in his as college senior by covering an actress completely in blood. It was a lifelong dream and everything else. And I, being the executive producer, which that role was thrusted upon me, had to remind him that we got to make sure we do this in the lawn and not downstairs because we can't get blood everywhere, especially in a basement.
Your basement was dirty and dusty as hell. It wouldn't have mattered if there was some dried blood on the floor. No one would have known. No one would have cared. Your dad probably wouldn't have even noticed.
Yeah, they probably would have.
Also, you were more worried about your goddamn pants.
I was worried about my pants, but you know, but but also having a large pool of blood in the basement of a very Chicago Italian neighborhood probably would have inspired some very interesting questions. My family's from Grand and Western, so that's where all the gentlemen used to live, as I call them, with a lot of vowels in their names.
When we lived in Chicago, we ended up going to a restaurant. Sadly, I can't remember the name of it anymore, but it's not in operation anymore. But we found out after the fact that it was mob owned.
Yeah,
and, I mean, the owner literally looked like he stepped out of Goodfellas, and he had no neck, and his name was Joe, and he literally would be like, "Hey, anything wrong with your stick?"
Of course, his name was Joe. Of course, his name was Joe. You know, my father is like worldly educated. He's like, you know what, man? But you know what? You can take me out of the city, man, but you can never take the city out of the boy. I get a couple drinks in me, and I'm get downtown, and I'm doing trees and does and all kinds of shit. I lost $3,000 on a dice game last night. It was terrible.
It turned out that one of the other restaurants that was owned by Joe, they found a guy tied to a chair, beaten to death with a baseball bat in the basement. And so we were like, "Oh, okay then." All right.
That happens. So anyway, so at the end of the podcast, I always do a fun question of the podcast, and I think this one's appropriate. What is a turf of horror or a subgenre of horror that you have not covered yet in your artistic approach, but you would like to? Like maybe a subgenre of horror that you're like, man, I would love to tackle that. In tradition of the Nightmares podcast, we usually allow the guests to go first, but you can, as per tradition states, that you can pass to somebody, and we can always come back to you. But I'm very curious to hear what you may want to do, and I love when the guest goes, "Ooh," that means I got a good question.
Okay, maybe pass.
All right, Zach.
Got them all running through my head right now. I need to decide.
Fair enough. Go ahead. You can pick multiple options too, by the way.
I just want to film a shark movie. That's one of my ultimate goals. I want to, and not one of those stupid, campy, bullshit CGI shark movies. I want to film a legitimately good, horrifying shark movie. Something that has been done very few and far between. There might only be 5 of them in existence. I will be the 6th one, second place only to Jaws.
I think that I want to do more shit with werewolves. I don't think there's enough werewolf movies out there, and I want to do some more shit with werewolves. And maybe even I want to explore more things that I heard on. I was a big fan of the show Supernatural, which is very much about folklore. So I would love to dive deeper into some of these other folklores, like Wendigos. I know there was that movie Antler that just came out. I have not seen it yet. Dive more into Wendigos, maybe some other demigods, some Nordic gods. But definitely some shapeshifters and some werewolves would be really dope, because I think there's a lot of movies like that, but there's not enough. There's a lot of vampire movies, but there's not enough werewolf movies, in my opinion.
I actually am. I just we forget things and you just remember it. I have actually been working on for the past couple years my own giallo.
Nice.
Which is a subgenre I've always loved. I mean, Deep Red, the Bird with the Crystal Plumage.
Sure.
Dario Argento, and then just Knife of Ice, A Quiet Place to Kill, like all these, the black gloves, the knives, the colors. I mean, did you guys ever see Knife Plus Heart?
Not that one, but I've seen some of the other giallo, movies as well. I'm just trying to remember some of the titles, but yeah, I've seen, a few of them, so I know the style very well.
Okay, yeah, you guys got to see, if none other, you got to see Knife Plus Heart. It's a more modern one, but it's fantastic. You've got a killer stalking the set of a gay porno in the 70s. I mean, the cinematography, it's fantastic. It really is. But I've been working on one for a while, and that is something. It's funny because that was something I was going to finish, because next May May and into June will actually be my directorial debut.
Oh,
Ooh.
congratulations!
Congratulations.
Thank you. I have a script that we're getting the funds for right now that I'm going to do, but I was originally going to do the Giallo, but which I titled Screwdriver. But I figured out that I want to do something a little different than that, because that's going to be like a big passion project. I want to do something that would take a smaller budget that I could make and still be really impactful.
Sure.
So what I'm going to end up directing is in the vein of a dark fairy tale type of horror.
Nice. You know what? There isn't enough of those either.
No, there's really not. And I grew up on fairy tales, and I mean the horror elements in fairy tales are just so strong, and just I would love to. I'm going to have a lot of fun playing around with that this spring.
Absolutely. So, all right, well, sir, it is your opportunity to look directly to your camera and plug where the good people can find you and find more information about your films and all your social media handles and your hashtags and whatever else the kids are saying these days. Go ahead, sir.
All right. Hi, guys. I'm Michael Donovan Horn. I'm a screenwriter and an author. My films are The Dinner Party and Demigod, which are officially on streaming. You can find them on iTunes, of course, and various other platforms. I'm also an author. I've written a short story collection of horror stories called Monster Box. You can find that on Amazon, and you can find that on BarnesandNoble.com. I'm also an artist. You can find my art at Big Cartel under the Dark Thicket. So take a look and tell me what you think. You know, you can see my movies, read my book, tell me what you think, give me reviews. You know, horror people, find me.
Very nice. Though, thank you so much. And thank you all of you for checking out the Nightmares podcast. You can find us where all podcasts are found. Spotify, YouTube, Anchor, all that great stuff. And if you are watching on YouTube, if you could be so awesome to stab that like button, smash that subscribe, and click that little dingy bell to be notified every time we drop amazing content. You can also find us on all of our great social medias, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Slasher. The application for all things horror. You can also find Mike on there as well under his full name. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time on the Nightmares podcast. Bye, guys.